need for all of you to do the sharing. As you know, this information is not information that the social mainstream media wants us to hear. So make sure you do your part and text, tag, tell everybody that we have Dr. Goldhamer in the classroom. He's going to be our teacher today. So let me go ahead and start the record button. We're starting a little early because I want to get as much information to you as quickly as possible. Here we go. I'm going to hit the record. Okay, everybody, we are going to learn from Dr. Alan Goldhamer, and we're going to talk about fasting today. So open your mind, and the best way to open your mind is to dance. And after you're done dancing, fasten your seatbelts because we're going to learn and grow together. Here we go.
The Lillian McDermott Show.
We love, we fear, bridges we burn, we make mistakes, then we live and learn. When life gets tough, and it seems like your best ain't good enough. If you're in need of hope, you know where I'll be right here, right here. And when you need a friend, you can count on me. I'll be right here, waiting for
you. This is the place you can always turn to when you need a friend. The Lillian McDermott Show. To reach out to Lillian, visit her on the web at whenyouneedafriend.com. Now let's all learn together. Here's Lillian McDermott.
Hello, my listening and viewing friend. It's so nice we can meet each other on the air on this beautiful, best day ever. And for those of you who are tuning into the classroom for the first time, please know I've been waiting for you. This is a safe place where you can go to when you need a friend. It is my commitment to provide natural ways to heal, and it is my mission to make awareness, responsibility, and truth a part of our everyday life. And I hope you, my listening, as well as my viewing friend, will feel empowered to embrace a new truth and live the life of your dreams. So as you know, back in 2019, in preparation for the breast explantation or breast implant explantation surgery, I did a water fast with Dr. Michael Klaper. And all of you love Dr. Michael Klaper. Well, guess what? We have the founder of TrueNorth Health here today. Dr. Alan Goldhamer is the founder of this place. And as you know, we enjoyed doing this fast together. And what better way to kind of go into the new year, because I believe another fast is about to happen in my life. And I want to be able for all of you to make that decision, to make the best choices for you and turn health around. We're going to do the I Am the Solution Natural Health Summit this weekend. And this is just part of us growing bolder together and healthier together. And today we have Dr. Alan Goldhamer of TrueNorth Health Centers in California. And he's going to share how he's been able to help tens of thousands of people reverse their diseases by making a choice and doing it. And since it is our sole purpose in life to give and receive love and knowledge, I am so grateful that Dr. Alan Goldhamer is here to do just that. Welcome, Dr. Goldhamer, to the classroom.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm sure that as a chiropractic doctor, you're thinking that, okay, this is going to be my life. This is what I've trained to do. But one would never think that fasting would be a part of what somebody would choose to do. So how did you stumble? Tell us a little bit about your background and how did you become so passionate about fasting as medicine?
Well, originally I was mostly interested in getting peak health because I was trying to beat my friend Doug Weil in basketball. And so I started reading some books because, I practiced a lot. It didn't, he still beat me. So I thought if I got healthier than he was, maybe that would give me an edge. And so I started reading books on health. And one of the books was by a guy named Herbert Shelton. And he had this interesting idea. He said that health was the automatic result of healthful living. And that healthful living involved what you ate and how you slept, and what activities you engaged in. And he also discussed this idea of fasting. He said that people were mostly sick in the modern world because of dietary excess, and that fasting was a way of giving the body a chance to mobilize and eliminate those products that were the result of dietary excess. And it seemed very interesting to me, and I thought, I would pursue that. Unfortunately, it didn't help me beat Dr. Lyle in basketball. I'm 64 years old. He still beats me badly as we play now, because he adopted the same kind of diet and lifestyle. So unfortunately, it didn't give me the edge I was looking for, but it did get me interested in this whole idea of health and healthful living. And so I decided at a relatively early age, I was in my teenage years, that I would pursue this type of alternative medicine. I was actually inspired by my uncle as well, who was a physician. And I remember actually at my 16th birthday, he came, and my mother was concerned because I had adopted a plant-based diet back then as a result of the reading. And she was concerned that that might be inadequate nutrition. So she asked my uncle to talk to me about this dietary issue. And he assured her that it was perfectly fine for kids to go through various dietary manipulations. And as long as I ate plenty of gefilte fish and whatnot, I'd be fine. And I explained to him, no, that was actually involved a vegan diet. That means no animal food at all. And he thought that was ridiculous. And he suggested I stop that nonsense immediately. I also, at that same dinner, I told my family I had decided to pursue alternative medicine as a career. He became irate. He was yelling and screaming. He said, nobody in this family would go to a doctor like that, let alone become a doctor like that. He said, better you should be a communist spy. Oh. And I thought he was going to stroke out with the veins sticking out in his neck.
Oh my gosh.
After dinner, my father, who was a really serious guy, took me aside. He said, son, I don't know anything about this alternative medicine, but anything that makes him that angry and mad, it can't be bad. So stick to your guns and good luck to you.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Did your uncle ever come around after that?
My uncle would not review our first data that we were putting together on a hypertensive study. And he said he wouldn't waste his time because nobody with blood pressure ever got well. And I said, Uncle, I was in osteopathic training in Australia at the time. I said, I'm taking their pressures. He goes, well, then you don't know how to take blood pressure, because I've been in practice 50 years and they never get well. When we came back and began to do the study, he wouldn't look at the data. He said until it was published in a peer-reviewed journal, he wouldn't waste his time. Finally, we got our paper accepted by a peer-reviewed journal. 2 months before it actually came out, he died of a massive heart attack. And my mother swore he died just so he wouldn't have to admit he was wrong. I personally think he died from eating too many K foods, the kugel, the kreplach, the knishes, the blintzes, but we'll never know.
Well, what an interesting story. And I had mentioned this to you when we were off the air, that how when people decide to do something, like they'll call, eating whole food, plant-based or raw or vegan or don't eat animal products or whatever, radical. But then they will undergo surgery and they will feel sick, and they will, that to me is radical. And so what will it take? What will it take to change that mentality?
Well, actually, I would say that radical comes from the word radicus, which means root or cause. So I think this is a radical approach. I think it's trying to deal with the reason people are actually getting sick. Let's think about it. Today, cardiovascular disease and hypertension, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and cancers like lymphoma make up the vast majority of things that kill people prematurely. Mm-hmm. And we know that all of those conditions have one thing in common. They're caused or aggravated by the consequences of dietary excess. People eat too much, they get fat, they develop metabolic syndrome, and then they're vulnerable to dying from heart disease, cancer, autoimmune diseases, and lymphoma. So it's not just the fat, but particularly the visceral fat, the fat that accumulates around the belly and around the organs that produces the inflammatory markers like IL-6 and TNF-alpha, et cetera, that cause these diseases. So if we know that dietary excess causes excess weight and causes immune suppression, then it's not shocking to think that fasting is a way of giving the body a chance to mobilize and eliminate excess weight. When you fast, there's all kinds of biomarker changes that occur, associated with getting well. There's another thing you can do that causes many of the same biomarker changes, and that's called exercise. Turns out exercise and fasting have one thing in common. They both undo the consequences of dietary excess and prolong health and life. If you take rats and periodically fast them, you can double their lifespan. If you take rats and allow them to exercise, they produce more BDNF and don't get Alzheimer's disease. Both fasting and exercise induce, for example, increases in BDNF. If you just look at exercise research and then you look at those biomarkers and then you test it in fasting, you can save a whole lot of time because it turns out both of them have those common pathways in common.
And yet we still perish from these terrible diseases that need not happen.
Well,
And
as we talk about in our book, The Pleasure Trap, people are addicted to the artificial stimulation of dopamine in their brain. This neurochemical is the chemical associated with pleasure. So the more dopamine, the more pleasure. And the way your body and brain are set up, the brain is designed to move the body in a way that favors survival and reproduction. But it does that from its design in a world of scarcity, in an environment of scarcity. And as a consequence, the higher the caloric density of the food, that is, the more calories per unit, the more dopamine is produced because the brain perceives it as more valuable. And so what happens is people can become artificially stimulated by highly processed foods into overeating. That's why people get fat, is because they eat too many calories. And the reason they eat too many calories is the normal satiety mechanism in their brain gets overrun by the artificial stimulation of certain chemicals that we put in our feed. For example, if you take rice, mice or rats or birds, and you put these chemicals in their feed, they'll gain 49% of their body weight in 60 days. If you put the chemicals in humans, they will overeat and they'll get fat and develop the consequences of dietary excess. Those chemicals are SOS, which of course is the international symbol of danger, but it stands for salt, oil, and sugar. Salt, oil, and sugar are not food. They're hyper-concentrated food byproducts. They're added to food to stimulate dopamine in our brain, and they cause us to overeat. And they cause us to overeat by stimulating dopamine in the brain, which causes pleasure. So the more of these chemicals you put in your food, the more you like it. That's why people become addicted to the dietary pleasure trap, because of the chemicals we're putting in our feed.
You know, interesting. And by the way, if any of you have any questions for Dr. Goldhamer, please write a Q, type in a Q and write your questions after it, and we'll get to it before the end of the class today. So you talk about salt, oil, and sugar. And okay, we understand oil, we understand sugar, although some people say we need, there are some cardiologists out there that are promoting drinking olive oil, and that's crazy. But with salt, we all know that people with low sodium cannot thrive, cannot survive. And so with that in mind and that mentality, how can you know the balance of sodium, and do you need to even add sodium to your food?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, oil is just, 9 calories per gram, highly fractionated fat. You need fat, but you don't need oil, because you get all the fat you need from whole plant foods.
That's right.
And you need carbohydrates. That's your primary fuel, but you don't need sugar, because you get all the carbohydrates you need from whole natural food. And you need sodium. Sodium is an essential nutrient without which you would die. But you don't need to add processed salt to your food, because you get all the sodium you need in your food. And people might say, well, oil has 9 calories per gram. Of course, the fat you eat is the fat you wear. So, that they understand that. And sugars are refined carbohydrates and empty calories. And so when you eat sugar, your blood insulin goes up, which drives your blood sugar down, which makes your brain think you're starving. And so you get craving and binging, and you overeat, and it messes up your gut microbiome, and it causes immune suppression, and it is a source of extra calories without satiety feedback. But how could salt make you fat? Because there's no calories in salt. Sodium chloride is a mineral. There's no calories. Yet it makes you fat. And the way it makes you fat is through a process called passive overeating. If you take an animal or a human and you have it eat any whole natural food, it will eat a certain amount, and then the satiety or satiation mechanism in the brain will kick in, and it'll feel full, and it'll stop eating. Everything else being equal, if you take the same animal and the same food, but add salt, oil, and sugar to it, or just salt in this case, you will find they will eat more before they feel satisfied, before they reach satiation. And people say, yeah, because it tastes better. Yeah. But that's what tasting better means, is it results in more dopamine stimulation in your brain. So yes, it does taste better, but it's an artificial stimulation. Just like any chemical stimulation, it can lead to addiction. So if you drink too much alcohol, you can become an alcoholic. If you eat too much salt, you can become addicted to the artificial stimulation of dopamine in the brain, and you will eat more, and then you will become overweight, and then you will develop metabolic syndrome, and then you will be vulnerable to dying from everything from cancer to COVID-19. So this process of systematic overeating is absolutely triggered by these highly processed fractionated foods, chemicals that are added to our foods like salt, oil, and sugar.
It's interesting that you think most people, if they eat the standard American diet, they're having lots of sodium in their processed foods. And I read it a long time ago, and I don't know if this is true, but I did research it a while ago, that the food industry spends billions of dollars trying to figure out the salt, sugar, the flavors to hack your brain into wanting to eat more and become addictive. Can you expand on any of that? Or
what they're trying to do is just make the food taste as good as possible, i.e. make the food stimulate as much dopamine as they can in the brain. So, for example, if you look at something like cocaine works because it's a massive source of stimulation of dopamine in the brain. For example, if you look at how much dopamine is secreted when you smoke cocaine, and you compare it to how much dopamine is secreted when you have an orgasm during sex, there's 10 times more dopamine production from smoking cocaine.
Wow.
So very reinforcing, very addictive. The normal natural stimulants of dopamine for humans is food and sex, eating and sex, because these are the behaviors that humans needed to engage in to favor survival and reproduction. And so the way the brain made sure the body engaged in those behaviors is it heavily reinforced them. And in the case of food, dopamine production; in the case of sexual activity, dopamine production in the brain. I mean, you can imagine, what if the species wasn't heavily reinforced for sexual behavior, for example? Do you think people would do all that huffing and puffing and sweating? I don't think so. And if you weren't heavily reinforced for eating behavior, you wouldn't necessarily get enough to eat and live to reproduce. Your ancestors were on, they liked to eat. They got theirs and, got enough to eat and didn't get eaten. And that's how those genes and those characteristics are passed on by survival. So you're heavily reinforced. The problem is, in a natural setting, there is no cocaine, and there is no oil, salt, and sugar, or highly concentrated fractionated food byproducts. So you're perfectly designed for an environment of scarcity where you eat as much as you can, whenever you can. You get the most concentrated calories possible. And if you're lucky, you live to reproduce. But now in the modern world of abundance, you can get enough to eat and not get eaten without ever getting out of your chair. You don't even have to get out of the car to walk into the fast food place to get 2,000 calories of grease and slime, which you can consume before you can hit the street. And as a consequence, it's not if, it's just when you're going to develop obesity if you consume those artificially concentrated chemicals. And that's why 70% of people now, actually over 70%, are overweight or obese. And it's not because they want to be overweight. They're trying not to be overweight. They don't want to be overweight, but they can't help it because they're artificially stimulated by the with dopamine production from these chemicals that they're eating in their food. They are addicts.
We are addicts. And, it's interesting because when I changed my lifestyle in all the years that I've been eating a certain way, I've been made fun of and sometimes bullied even. Made feel shame that I'm not eating like other people are eating. And my journey started when I found out I was allergic to certain foods. Well, back in the 90s, it wasn't popular to be gluten-free. It wasn't popular to be dairy-free. So I learned to have a tough skin, but it's really easy for someone to say, oh, have another piece of cake, have another this, have another that. And but if they know that you're an alcoholic, if you know somebody, nobody would force you to drink other than your alcoholic friends would say, oh, come on. And so the behavior is very similar. So if I were an alcoholic and I'm hanging around alcoholic friends, they would treat me no different than someone that is addicted to food and I want to change my lifestyle or reverse disease. The same kind of behavior would happen. So what is the best way to kind of separate yourself from that and start taking the path that without bringing your friends on board? What would your advice would be for that?
Yeah, if you're, we don't tell our alcoholic friends, look, a little bit won't hurt. I made it just for you. You're no fun anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, if
Guilt.
you're if but when we have people that are overweight, if you're overweight and you try to eat a health promoting diet, a little bit won't hurt. Oh, if you want to lose weight, just put your food on a smaller plate. Cut your food and put your fork down between each bite. You won't be overweight anymore. We know that doesn't work. The fact is that people are overweight because they're addicted to the artificial stimulation of dopamine in their brain from the chemicals that they're eating. The only answer for them is the same answer as an alcoholic. What do you tell an alcoholic? You have to quit drinking. You have to stop taking in the substance that you're not capable of regulating effectively. If you're overweight and you want to lose weight, you have to stop fooling your brain with salt, oil, and sugar. And if you do that, you win. And if your average weight loss between 2 and 3 pounds of weight, depending on your own individual characteristics, there are certain people in our society that have a genetic predisposition towards weight gain. These are people that's biology is such that they gain weight really easily. These people are called women because they're full of estrogen, which is a fat storage hormone, and they're designed to store fat to survive a period of biological vulnerability called pregnancy. Do you know only women can have babies, that men are completely incapable of having babies? And it's a good thing because I did the math and I figured out that if men had the babies, our species would have been extinct within 20 generations.
That's right.
And we know that's true because you need 2.1 births per couple for a species to survive. And I can guarantee you, if men had the babies, there never would have been a single case of a second birth, not even one time. As a consequence, humans would have gone away. However, we didn't because women have the babies, women have estrogen rather than testosterone. If you inject enough of testosterone into women, their fat would just melt off them. But they get hairy and get cancer and die. It wouldn't be a good strategy. But if you inject men with estrogen, they get fat. They grow breasts, they get hips. These differences are biological. And part of it's because in order for females to be successful in their reproductive capacities, they had to store a higher percent body fat. And so they're designed to be more efficient. That's why if a husband and wife goes on a diet together, they don't lose weight at the same rate. Men will lose an average of 3 pounds a week, everything else being equal, women about 50% less. And so what that means, if you happen to be one of those members of our species that have trouble losing weight, if you're a woman, then you have to work twice as hard to get half the results. So you have to get used to it.
It's amazing. When we hear this information and we learn these new truths, why people don't stop what they're doing and say, wow, this makes sense. If I were to just change the way I purchase my food and start eating and making my food, I don't ever have to diet again. That word, it's just you change your lifestyle. So let's talk about some of the myths, because, for them to find out that the system is hacking their brain and causing them to crave. And of course, it's going to create the microbiome that's going to create the more sugar, more oil, more salt. But what are some of the ways that we can kind of override this mentality that, it is what it is and I can never change. I like my piece of meat, or I like my piece of fried food, or whatever it is. What are some of the steps that people can take towards this lifestyle that we're talking about, this radical lifestyle that could be life-changing for them?
Well, the first thing is just to become aware of the trap, of the pleasure trap. That's why we wrote the book, The Pleasure Trap.
Yep,
because it explains that the hidden force that undermines health and happiness is this consumption of chemicals that are added to the feed. Most people don't even realize that their food is being manipulated in order to make it more appealing and to make it more interesting to you. And that artificial stimulation creates the problem. So the first thing is to become aware of it. The second thing is trying to come up with a strategy to escape the pleasure trap. And that can be difficult. You need to know, first of all, in the case of salt, it takes almost a month for the average person on a low sodium diet to neuroadapt to enjoying low salt food. At first, it won't be appealing because you're used to this artificial stimulation, just like it's not easy for an alcoholic to quit drinking, or a person even with caffeine or other types of addictive substances to stop without getting physical withdrawals. You'll get withdrawal effects when you eliminate salt, for example, or if you go on a low-fat diet. It takes almost 3 months for the average person to neuroadapt to a low-fat diet before they'll get normal satiation feedback from healthy foods. So just making the dietary change and being persistent is helpful. for those that want to do it quicker, there are methods like fasting that make that transition happen much more quickly. There's two kinds of fasting that we talk about commonly. One are intermittent fasting, which people can do on their own safely, where they limit their feeding window. And we recommend that people trying to lose weight limit their feeding window to 8 hours a day. So they'll have 12 or 16 hours of fasting every day and 8 hours of feeding. And that the way they do that would be by limiting their evening eating. In other words, stop eating 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed at night, and then delay breakfast until you've had a chance to do some exercise in the morning. And what that'll do is it'll maximize fat mobilization, and it'll limit the late night eating, which tends to allow your body to efficiently convert those calories that are consumed after dinner into fat rather than being burned. And even that 16 hours of fasting every day, day after day, cumulatively induces changes that are thought to be health promoting and disease reversing. And then the other type of intervention we talk about is a little bit more involved. It's medically supervised water only fasting, where we do a period of 2 to 40 days, but generally in a controlled setting where there's been a history, exam, laboratory screening to make sure the person's a good candidate for that. Not everybody's a good candidate for fasting. People that are on medications that need to be modulated, people that have health histories, may not always be a good candidate for fasting. But if you are a good candidate for fasting, then a longer period of time can have a profound effect. And we've published a number of papers looking at the effect of fasting on treating high blood pressure, on diabetes, and cancers like lymphoma. And so, people interested in that, they can actually look at the research data, which is really quite amazing about how good the body is at healing itself from these diseases that are associated with dietary excess.
It is amazing how the body is so forgiving once you give it what it needs. And so you had mentioned cancer, you also mentioned diabetes, but can people reverse heart disease? Like, for example, I know a lot of people that are concerned, and what they do is they go to the doctor, and the doctor medicalizes them by doing a cath or putting in a stent, you can't reverse that once you do that, it's done. But let's say somebody may have a clogged artery and changes their lifestyle, but they're not having a heart attack or anything like that. What is your advice to them?
Well, Dean Ornish in 1980 in Lancet showed us that coronary artery disease that was at once thought not reversible was absolutely reversible. Dietary change alone over time will allow coronary artery disease to reverse. And he published a paper in Lancet, and since then there's been numerous studies that have been published that show quite conclusively that coronary artery disease is a reversible process. We've published a study on the treatment of high blood pressure, which is a leading contributing cause of death and disability from cardiovascular disease. And high blood pressure in this study that we did at TrueNorth Health Center, 174 consecutive patients were enrolled, 174 patients were able to normalize their pressure and eliminate medication. This is an entirely reversible process in essential hypertension. And we've since then, in fact, more recently published a study with our colleagues at the Mayo Clinic. And in this, we enrolled 30 subjects with stage 1 or stage 2 hypertension. 28 of those were able to successfully complete fasting. Of those, 27 were not only able to normalize their blood pressure, but eliminate all medication. And we have data now, 1 year follow-up data on those subjects. And what was really amazing was that they were able to not only maintain their weight loss and their normal blood pressure state, but 27 out of the 28 subjects were free of medication. So, this is clearly a reversible process in highly motivated patients that undergo medically supervised water-only fasting.
Yeah, but they're going to have to rewrite the programming because, and make a change in their life. So what is the first step? What are some of the myths about the fasting? Because I thought I was going to be hungry the whole time, and I fasted for 5 days. And throughout the diary that I kept for everybody to watch, it's on YouTube. I did it with Dr. Michael Klaper, who used to work at TrueNorth Health Centers. And so I recorded it. It's on YouTube. It's there for free if you want to do it, watch it. But I remember saying, I eat all the time. I'm a big eater, and I eat healthy foods. I eat primarily whole food, plant-based, but I'm always eating. I love to eat. It's I guess the way I grew up. And so I thought, I'm going to be hungry all day. I was never I never felt hunger, and I felt energy. I took time for myself, and I took a little break for myself from the show, and I just, and from working out, or I just took care of myself. And it was a really, not only an amazing experience for me, didn't feel hungry, realized that my connection to food was not a good one. And then lastly, I felt a spiritual connection to God. And so what are some of the myths that you've encountered because you've probably, have seen it all. You've seen it all.
Yeah, well, people think that if they were to get on an airplane in New York and fly all the way to California, they would die over Colorado from starvation if they didn't eat the pretzels. They think those pretzels saved their life. The reality is an average 70-kilogram male can fast up to 70 days. Not that they necessarily should, but they could, because the body is very efficient. Fasting is a biological adaptation. Mm-hmm. Humans had to be able to fast to survive a period of vulnerability that comes when spring comes late. Because our brains are the largest burner of glucose in our body, and they're ridiculously oversized in humans compared to the other animals we share the planet with, our capacity and limitations are severe. If we didn't have access to food for more than a week or so, and our brain didn't have the ability to change fuels from burning glucose to burning fat, we wouldn't be able to survive. You notice chimps never wander away from the tropics because they need a constant supply of food in order to survive, because they don't fast. Their brain doesn't convert over to burning ketones in the same way that humans do. So this biological adaptation was so important that all the pre-humans that couldn't fast died. Every human on the planet, it has this process of conversion of burning fat. And that ketonic fuel source, it's essentially beta-hydroxybutyric acid, becomes the primary source of the brain. What that does when you go into fasting is a hunger blunting mechanism. The reason you don't feel hunger when you're fasting is because when your brain, after a couple of days, changes over to burning fat, there's a hunger blunting natural mechanism. And the people that are doing fasting mimicking diets are trying to take advantage of that hunger blunting mechanism. They'll put people on high fat, high protein diets because they feel it'll help them lose weight because they're not hungry, because they've eliminated carbohydrates and they've gone into this fasting mimicking method. The problem is that what's good for short-term weight loss isn't necessarily good for long-term health. Just like you wouldn't just fast forever, you also wouldn't want to necessarily put people on high-fat, high-protein diets forever, because the consequences are quite devastating long-term in terms of their health. So you have to be careful when people talk about mimicking the effects of fasting. The reason why that mechanism is there is for your survival in a situation where, there is nothing to eat. You're able to carry on functioning and continue to search for appropriate fuel. And although it's a very natural mechanism, trying to reproduce that by putting people on long-term high-fat, high-protein diets can be devastating in terms of their health, even if it is successful at short-term weight loss.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So you had mentioned earlier that there are certain people that should not do a fast. Is there a particular concern? Would you say that someone who maybe is under medical supervision with medication, they should only do a fast under medical supervision? Or
people should fast every day on their own, up to 16 hours a day.
Anybody can do that.
For virtually everybody.
Everybody can do that. Okay, good.
And so that's usually not a problem. I think everybody, before they undergo long-term fasting, should benefit from having a physician review their history, do a physical exam, and get some baseline laboratory data, because there's a lot of people that would be not benefited from undergoing fasting. For example, if you're pregnant or lactating, if you're lactating, you're going to lose milk production if you do a prolonged fast. If you're on medications, the medications that you may get away with them when you're feeding, you may not get away with them fasting, because the medications can be profoundly potentiated during the fasting state. You have a completely different physiology in your body fasting than you do feeding. So that definitely needs to be evaluated. And the arbitrary discontinuation of medications can also be damaging or deadly, particularly when we're talking about steroids, anticoagulant medicine, et cetera. So those any medication issues clearly has to be discussed with a physician familiar with fasting. Then the other thing is you have to rest when you fast. If you're active, you're not going to be working or driving and doing these activities. Not only would you be a threat to yourself and others, but it would be very counterproductive. For example, when you fast, you're trying to primarily burn fat, and particularly visceral fat. And when you go on a fast after a couple of days, you deplete your glycogen stores. The only way you can get glucose at that point is to break down protein from a process called gluconeogenesis. Well, if you're active when you're fasting, you will increase your muscle demand for glucose and your brain demand for glucose. That's going to result in more weight loss, but it's not going to be fat, it's going to be protein. So in order to conserve your lean tissues, you need to rest when you're fasting. So if you're going to fast, you have to rest, which means you're not going to work and you're not driving and you're not carrying on vigorous physical activities. And then the other mistake that people make is when they're fasting, if they're too active, they can get into problems with dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, and other problems. The next problem that can come up is too rapid recovery to feed, refeeding. Eating after fasting can result in what's called refeeding syndrome, which can be very serious or fatal.
Oh.
And so there's a number of ways people can get mucked up doing long-term fasting unless they rest, unless they've had appropriate baseline data, unless they're monitored appropriately. That would be a contraindication. So yes, fasting every day for up to 16 hours, eating healthy every day, and you're going to get progressive weight loss. You'll improve your health. If you want to speed that up, do it right. And that means make sure there's been an appropriate history exam and lab, as well as proper monitoring and resting, and then careful refeeding. It takes half the length of the fast to appropriately refeed. For example, a 20-day water fast would take 10 days of controlled refeeding. We usually start with fresh fruit and vegetable juices, then raw fruit and vegetables, then introduce more concentrated foods progressively as digestive capacities increase. Too rapid a return to, say, for example, high sodium foods or other issues can result in post-fasting edema, refeeding syndrome, all kinds of downstream consequences. So unfortunately, I get a lot of calls from people, well-intentioned people that are undergoing fasting, but have made a mess of it because either they weren't a good candidate for fasting, they didn't rest or hydrate properly during fasting, or they're not refeeding properly after fasting. And so I see all the problems that people can get into. And, you know, we work a lot with doctors that are trying to work with patients that are having trouble because of well-intentioned but misguided interventions.
So do you think that, and what is your experience with people who are on medication, when they're doing a fast with you, they're under medical supervision? Do you find that these medications end up being reduced to the point where they don't need them anymore?
We've reduced their medications and eliminated them before they even start fasting. We do that either through our telemedicine practice, where we work with the patients before they come in, or when they come in, they'll go through a period of feeding. You need to understand patients are generally not medicated for their conditions. They're medicated for their diets. And the moment you change their diet, their medication profile needs to change. And that's one of the problems people get into when they make radical dietary changes, but they aren't working with a doctor that can help them appropriately withdraw their medications. The medications themselves become the primary source of the problem. In fact, many of the patients we see, before they even get to us, by the time they've made the diet and lifestyle changes, their problems are already solved, even before we get to fasting. Their blood pressures are right. In fact, it happens frequently. Patients will work with our doctors remotely that we've enrolled in the study, but by the time they come in for their baseline eval, their blood pressure is already normal because they've changed their diet. They've gone on a whole plant food SOS-free diet. Health results from healthful living. If you make diet, life, and lifestyle changes, you're going to see results. Now, sometimes people have trouble doing that, or they need more help. They need a structured environment. That's where we have them come to a place like the TrueNorth Health Center, where we have a safe environment. They're seen twice a day by doctors. They're able to withdraw their medications appropriately. They're able to get the support they need. And they're able to get, they call it education, I call it brainwashing, where we do the intense education necessary to help people learn, you know, what a healthy diet looks like, what a whole plant food SOS-free looks like, how to prepare it, why, you know, they're doing what they're doing, so that when they go home, they can sustain those results long term.
You know, this is so, I hope all of you that are watching today and will watch or listen on podcasts, you know, will stop and listen again and again and again, and make a decision that this releasing weight, releasing weight isn't difficult if you change the way you think, the way you act, all these things. And we talk about this in the classroom, and I want to encourage you all to go to whenyouneedafriend.com and become a subscriber while you're there, and check out the different ways that you can change your health, make that first choice. One of them is to come to the I Am the Solution Natural Health Summit that's this weekend. As I said, we had a generous donation and we have free tickets. So if you can attend this weekend, January 21st, 2023, just text me and I will give you the code for you to get your free tickets. And this is for people who can't afford to come to the event, but if you can afford it, I either have another code that's Lily001, all lowercase, and it'll give you $24 off the event. So there's different ways that you can learn and grow. There's different ways that you can make. Maybe you're going, this is too difficult for me, but intermittent may work for you. So I want you to make these choices for yourself. Stop and listen and make some great choices. And this is what we discuss at whenyounneedafriend.com. While you're there, please subscribe, like, and follow me on all social media. Check out my sponsors. Support them the way that they're supporting the classroom. And you can go to my Shop Now bag and go there and look at all these products that will help you reverse disease, live a healthier life, spirit, mind, and body. And you can also become a donor in the classroom, whether it's $1 or $1,000 a month, or one-time donation, or a monthly donation, whether it's your time, your talent, your treasure, anything you can do to help. Even just sharing this video is helping the classroom grow. And so today we have Dr. Alan Goldhamer. He is the founder of TrueNorth Health Centers in California. And Dr. Goldhamer, do you do telemedicine? Can people contact you and go to your website at TrueNorthHealth.com to get in contact with your doctor?
Yeah, we have a dozen physicians that are on our telemedicine board. So we have lots of doctors with different skill sets and backgrounds available for people that want to do some work remotely. We have some doctors that help provide support to physicians that are trying to help their patients with things like intermittent or fasting. We have doctors that can help give you a second opinion about what's going on. We also have a free service for your viewers. If they go to our website at TrueNorthHealth.com and fill out the registration forms, that gets me their medical history. They can call me. I'll be happy to have a free phone conversation with them to point them in the right direction, determine if this is the kind of thing that might be helpful to them, try to match them with a doctor, either from our telemedicine practice or from their community that does this type of work, and try to help them move in the right direction. This
Wonderful.
is simple to do, but it's not easy. It's hard to live in a world designed to make you fat, sick, and miserable and do the right thing, because there's be a lot of forces of evil trying to undermine your success. There are people what I call energy vampires. There are people that do what they do best, and that's make other people as sick and miserable as they are. So by comparison, they don't have to feel so bad. And they will try to undermine your success. So I don't think it's easy to do because of the society that we live in. I do find the most motivated people are usually driven by pain, debility, and fear of death. And so we tend to work with a lot of people that, we're right up against it. But lately, we've been seeing more people that are healthy, but they have decided for some reason they want to stay that way. And I think the thing that this has to offer the most is actually to healthy people that want to live their full life and, have a good life and a good death where they go to bed and don't wake up one night once they've reached their genetic potential, and not spend the last 20 years of their life unable to talk or move, lying in some nursing home bed waiting for people to come and change their diaper because they've had a stroke or a heart attack or some preventable event. So it's not that you're going to live forever, you won't, but we want you to live until you die, live a full and healthy life, and not become dependent on those around you as a consequence of preventable illness.
So many people have said that to me, you got to die from something. And I say, yeah, we're all going to die, but how do you want to live? How do you want to live? And people don't even think of living, surviving a stroke, surviving a heart attack, surviving diabetes and dementia, surviving all these diseases. They don't even think about surviving. They just think they're going to die and it's going to be fun. They're going to just live a fun life, but not when all of a sudden things happen where they're going to be living with this disease. So you had talked about how everybody really could benefit from, whether it's intermittent fasting or, and some people will benefit, most people will benefit from doing a long-term fast. What about children? Because now I am seeing kids, morbidly obese children I've never seen before. What about children? How soon can a child...
Children tend to respond very rapidly to dietary change. And so with children, normally we don't have to do more radical fasting because all we have to do is clean up the diet and you clean up the condition. children's bodies are often younger and more vital than the older patients, and as a consequence, it's you see more rapid changes, especially if you can control what they put in their mouth.
Absolutely. And who's controlling that? The parent who's buying it. And so, parents sometimes come to me and say, I can't believe she's wearing this, or I can't believe they're eating that. Well, who bought it? We as parents, we need to take ownership for our children and help them live healthy lives. If we were to just teach our children young how to eat, disease would go away. It
Well,
would
the
just
problem
go
though is you
away.
have to mirror the behavior then. So it'd be hard for you to be eating processed food and drinking
Sure.
alcohol and carrying on, and then trying to get the kids, because they'll mirror your own behavior. If you're eating a healthy diet and lifestyle, and the only foods available to them in their home are healthy foods, it's obviously a little bit easier to get dietary and lifestyle control. One of the challenges, though, that as the kids get older and they go into the world, they're going into a world of addiction. And we've basically taught our kids to use drugs all their life. If they have a headache, they use a drug. If they're depressed, they take a drug. If they're tired, they take a drug. They take caffeine. We give them highly addictive nervous system stimulants in their quote food in the form of caffeine and other materials. And then when they get to be 16 years old, we tell them, well, just say no. And we're shocked when they don't just say no, because they've been basically trained to be drug addicts.
Mm-hmm. True, absolutely true. So as we, I know that we're not going to go into a lot of detail, because fasting, that is something that you need to be disciplined about. I remember going completely raw vegan right before my fast, and in preparation for that. Most people that attempt this and fail, they start off with a standard American diet, thinking that not drinking water is going to help them. What is your advice for them for that?
Well, you want to adopt a whole plant food, salt, oil, and sugar-free diet. So that would mean you're having fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. What you're not having is meat, fish, fowl, eggs, dairy products, oil, salt, and sugar, as well as caffeine or other addictive drugs like alcohol. And so if you go on a whole plant food, SOS-free diet, the longer you do that, the easier your transition to fasting is going to be. Preparation for water fasting, we usually have people eating fruit, salad, and steamed vegetables exclusively for at least a couple days. And then we'll enter into water fast. The fast will range from 2 to 40 days. It takes half the length of the fast to recover. And then we ask people to stick to a whole plant food, SOS-free diet until we accomplish our long-term goals.
I love it. Okay, so I would love to hear some of your stories. What is your most favorite story to tell when it comes to reversing disease, or maybe the longest fast you've ever done?
Better than that. I mean, we've got published papers with large ends. As I mentioned, we have medically supervised water-only fasting in the treatment of hypertension. We've published a number of papers now in peer-reviewed journals looking at large numbers of subjects that are able to normalize blood pressure. And to make a long story short, if you have high blood pressure, you go on a fast, it's going to normalize. And then if you adopt a whole plant food, SOS-free diet, it's going to stay normal. And as we get people's blood pressure normalized, we eliminate the need for medications, which cause chronic cough, fatigue, impotence, and death. The blood pressure medications are so dangerous that they won't give them to you until your systolic blood pressure rises considerably, enough so that the death rate from stroke outweighs the death rate from the medications. So in other words, if you give people with mild levels of elevated blood pressure medications, more will die from the drugs than they do from the blood pressure. So high blood pressure is an example of a condition that we've proven overwhelmingly with some of the largest effects that have ever been shown. The best treatment for high blood pressure is fasting and a whole plant food, SOS-free diet. We've also published case reports recently in the British Medical Journal on the treatment of follicular lymphoma, which is a type of lymph cancer. Medical treatment doesn't have much effect in terms of all-cause mortality, and so oftentimes they'll delay doing it because of all the terrible side effects from chemotherapy. In our case, this particular first subject was a 42-year-old female, underwent fasting for 21 days, completely resolved her palpable lesions, and now at 1 year, 3 years, and now 6 years has maintained a cancer-free state following a plant-based SOS-free diet. And now the only thing we do now is periodically we'll do fasting as a preventative measure. And she's managed to do well. And as a consequence of that, we now have 9 patients with lymphoma under observation. Whereas we collect the long-term data, and we're starting to get those results in now, the CT scans and whatnot. We'll be publishing a cohort looking at a number of these patients who are very consistently responding to this approach. We're hoping to do a clinical trial where we can do a large number of patients with random assignment to demonstrate that, in fact, this is a condition that responds to fasting. We're hoping to do next year with one of the large national HMOs a study involving 60 subjects with hypertension, high blood pressure, that is, that will be enrolled, and they'll be randomly assigned to either including fasting or standard of care, and then we'll cross them over after 6 months and demonstrate just what we've done in the most recent study with the Mayo Clinic, that people can maintain long-term weight loss and blood pressure loss if they're willing to do really dangerous and radical things like eat well, exercise, and go to bed on time. So we've been successful in treating autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, ankylosing spondylitis. We treat a lot of people with asthma, eczema, and psoriasis. We recently published a very graphic case of psoriasis, where you can see the before and after photos, very dramatic, from just 2 weeks of fasting. Actually, it wasn't even that long intervention. And again, to the degree that people are willing to make these dietary changes, they can often sustain those results indefinitely. All of our papers are available at a website called www.fasting.org. It's a fasting compendium website. And they can use that site to search the literature for other people's research as well as it relates to fasting. Our primary website, TrueNorthHealth.com, is useful for people that want to have a conversation with me or that want to look at all of our articles and other support materials for making these diet and lifestyle changes. So there's a lot of information that are available now, much more so than before the internet era. And as a consequence, people that are interested in really getting a handle on this, they can do it quite readily. And of course, they can read our book, The Pleasure Trap, which is, a fabulous book. It's a little bit disturbing because it doesn't tell you what you want to hear. It tells you what you need to know.
Correct. And, it's amazing how, when I say it's simple, it is simple. Once you get over all the mindset, the rewriting of the program, once you get over wanting to please your friends and wanting to go out and eat with your friends, once you get over that, it's simple because your body will forgive, it will return and restore. So what advice do you give to someone who's listening today, and this is the first time, and they might be considering doing a fast?
Well, I think the first thing is get the diet right in preparation, regardless of how you're going to fast. So adopt the whole plant food SOS-free diet. Get off the medication. Talk to your doctor that's prescribed your drugs. Come up with a pattern to withdraw those medications safely and appropriately. You can go to TrueNorthHealth.com and sign up with one of the attendings if you want to work with a doctor that's not an idiot, that's used to people actually getting well. It's interesting. We have a residency training program at TrueNorth Health Center where doctors come and they rotate through and learn how to do this. And the most common comment of our residents is, wow, I've never seen anybody with this condition get well before. Because they'll have worked with diabetics perhaps all their career, but never actually had anybody get well. Like my uncle with blood pressure, practiced for 50 years, but, as far as he was concerned, nobody ever got well. It's not even part of the paradigm. They'll tell you when you come in the office, oh, you'll be on these drugs the rest of your life. You'll never get well. And after a while, if you've worked your whole career and nobody ever gets well, I'd start thinking maybe it's me.
But that's what's so sad about it. We're taking these pills, and I don't know if you know this, but my registered service mark is you can take a pill, you can take responsibility. It's not that I'm against the pill, but I'm for doing whatever you need to do to reverse whatever condition you need to reverse. And, it's amazing how many people are okay with taking the pill and still needing the pill, and they're still having symptoms, and they're still swollen, they're still inflamed, they're still in pain, they're still hurting, but yet somehow this pill that one size fits all is the answer to them. What would you say to them? Wake them up.
The fact is the medicine is a great example of the pleasure trap, where we're trying to alleviate symptoms without actually having to pay the price of correcting the problem. So if you have pain, it's a lot easier to try to take a pain pill than to actually say, okay, why do I have pain? What can I do to reduce the weight, reduce the inflammation, stabilize the joints, fix the problem? It's a lot of work. And because people are so exhausted because they're caught in the dietary pleasure trap and they're sick and miserable, they don't have the energy in their own mind to take on anything, let alone making radical diet and lifestyle changes. There's a whole society out there and a whole organization set up to make it easy to do the wrong thing. And it's incredibly difficult to do the right thing. We heavily federally subsidize high fructose, corn syrup so that processed foods can be super cheap. We give away some of the most antagonistic foods on the planet, like dairy products, particularly in the form of cheese. We'll give it away, we'll make it free. And yet healthy foods are not subsidized and supported and promoted. So, as a society, we're not doing what we can to encourage health. During the recent COVID epidemics, one of the major risk factors for dying from infectious disease, including COVID-19, is obesity. And yet the social norm is to not even talk about obesity because that would be blaming the victim. Mm-hmm. And so, we have to, I think, have an attitude shift about accepting responsibility that dietary excess is what is making us vulnerable to many of the diseases that we're suffering from. And we have to come up with a strategy to overcome dietary excess, just like we have to have a strategy to overcome drinking if we're an alcoholic. It's like if you're not an alcoholic, some people can have a drink and not become an alcoholic. But if you're an alcoholic, it's not you. And some people can have a bit of cheese or chocolate or whatever it is and not become overweight. But if you're overweight, it's not you. You have to recognize your own limitations and stop fooling your brain with chemicals that are essentially leading you to addiction. You need to stop it. And then do this as an experiment. Adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet, get some sleep and exercise, and see how you feel after a few months. If you don't like it, you can go back to being an addict just like everybody else.
I love how you said you're not being medicated for your condition, you're medicated for your diet. And that I will take with me. Thank you so much for that. I will share that with everybody. Please share this video with your friends. Go on a fast together. Let's continue. Let's see what we're going to do with the classroom so that we can do something to motivate and encourage each other. Thank you so much, Dr. Alan Goldhamer. I hope that you will come back and share more information with us. And please remember, we'll be right here waiting for you worldwide at whenyouneedafriend.com. This is Lillian McDermott and Dr. Alan Goldhamer wishing you love, peace, joy, and unexpected abundance. Make it the best day ever. Good job. Good job.
The opinions and advice expressed on the Lillian McDermott radio show are intended for the individual callers and guests on the program and are presented to our wider audience solely for general educational purposes. Please act responsibly and consult personally with your own medical, psychological, or nutritional expert before taking any steps to improve your life.
Do you have one more question that I can ask you? One more question. Okay, so this is called the Teacher's Pet Corner, but I wasn't planning on a Teacher's Pet Corner, but I just have to ask. Sugar substitutes. You just mentioned fructose corn syrup. There's a lot of substitutes out there to sweeten up. I love module dates. I love the natural taste of module dates. But what is your research? What is your research showing you, or what you can tell us about the research on sugar substitute?
Well, the problem is the reason sugar substitutes were used was to try to keep people being able to indulge in these sweet substances, but without getting fat. The problem is they don't work. So there's pretty good evidence that the more artificial sweeteners you use, the fatter you're going to become. So it's not effective for weight loss. It's certainly not a health promoting habit. These chemicals are thought to be tied with everything from microbiome disruption to cancer. So it's not that they're healthy. They're not healthy at all. And they don't work for the intended purpose. So basically, they're just making people toxic and also feeding into the addictive response. It's just like the artificial salts. The potassium chlorides and stuff, they don't solve the problem. And then you never neuroadapt and get away from the fact you shouldn't be craving those things in any case. So I would argue against them. We don't use any of them in any form. And even some of the, quote, natural sweeteners like honey, which is twice as sweet as sugar, it's just less bad. In other words, yeah, it's twice as sweet. You may not use as many grams of it to get the same effect, but the principles remain the same. So we don't use any of the sweeteners, and there's really nothing you should be eating that needs to be sweetened if it's not overly processed. It's what we do is we take these heavily federally subsidized grains like corn, soy, and wheat and take all the nutrition out of them, and then we have to add sugar, oil, and salt back as we smash them into various forms and we pretend to call them food. What we want to do is eat whole foods with a clear palate, and then whole foods taste good and you don't need to sweeten it.
Love it. And, I'm glad that you shared that information for someone who says, well, I don't need sugar. I hear it all the time. Yes, we do. We eat, we hack our brains just as bad. So I want to thank you again for this information. I hope that it's been life-changing for you, all of you out there. I know it's been life-changing for me. I'm looking forward to doing another fast. Stay tuned. Maybe you guys can join me in this. And so thank you again. And the websites are TrueNorthHealth.com. And then you can look at your research, because don't believe anything we say. Do your own research, become your own MD, your own medical detective. It's www.fasting.org. Check it out. And you decide that you want to take your health back. And we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.